Welcome, everybody, to a bonus episode of Vetfolio Voice. That's right. This is not the Cone of Shame Veterinary Podcast. I mean, it is. I mean, it's like coming through the Cone of Shame channel. But this is an episode of another podcast called Vetfolio Voice that is hosted by my friend, Dr. Cassi Fleming. She is amazing if you don't know her. She invited me at the VMX conference to come to the Vetfolio booth and to be interviewed on a podcast for her. And then when it was over, she said, would you like to have the audio and you can put out as a Cone of Shame episode if you like. And I really loved our conversation. I thought it was really, really great. And so she has generously passed the audio over. And so I want you guys to check it out. But if you like this conversation, check out Vetfolio Voice. Check out what Dr. Cassie's doing. She's really great, but they have lots of other people much smarter and more interesting than me probably on doing interviews. So anyway, guys, thanks to Vetfolio Voice for letting me share this with you guys, and I hope you'll check out their other episodes of the podcast. Let's get into this episode.
This is your show. We're glad you're here. We want to help you in your veterinary career. Welcome to the Cone of Shame with Dr. DrAndyRoark.
Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm sitting here on the Expo Hall floor at VMX with the one and only DrAndyRoark. So thank you for joining me.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm happy to have you and to bring your messaging out, to the audience. Not that you need any help with that, because your messaging is far and wide and for a reason. You have so many good things to say, but I'm excited to sit down and talk to you and pick your brain a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Fire away. Whatever you want to talk about.
I guess we can start with a little bit of backstory of how we got introduced. Was me reaching out through Facebook, wondering if I was still a real vet. Yeah. Because I was going through some career changes and taking on a less clinical role. And I was really struggling emotionally with that, to go, am I still a real vet, or am I don't know, am I a sellout? Like, what's happening here? And you and I had a great conversation, and I felt so much better after our talk. So I'm wondering if we can bring a little bit of that to everybody listening.
Yeah, sure. I do remember that email and it sort of came in. But yeah, I think everybody has to find what works for them, right? It's kind of like with therapy. We're sort of like, there's no right answer. It's the tools that you need to kind of process and feel good about sort of where you are. And so self-identity is a big part of it. I think self-identity is a big part of vet medicine, right? The way we see ourselves really matters. It's why vets get so mad when pet owners will say stuff like you're only in this for the money. And we say that because it's a challenge to our core identity and who we are as people. And we know it's garbage. We know it's not true, but it's still like, it's so much being giving and supporting and helpful and doing everything we can, and so much a part of how we see ourselves, that when somebody says that, and again, it doesn't hit everybody that way, but there's a lot of vets who really react emotionally very strongly to it. But I think it's really because it hits that identity thing. And so there's very much a strong culture in vet medicine that I love. And you see, I was just talking to some technicians outside the booth, and they work in industry now. But I knew who they were as soon as I saw them. You can tell them the way they walk that they're technicians, like they're credentialed technicians. They've been in the trenches. Like you just talk to them for a minute, and you know that they have seen some stuff and they've done some stuff. Like they can't hide it. It's baked into who they are. And so that's the type of culture that we have. It kind of permeates you as a person after a while. And so it makes a lot of sense that, like, as you go on in your career and you start to do other things, especially as a doctor, when you're not just in the exam rooms, putting hands on patients and fixing patients, at some point you start to say, what does this mean for my identity, right? What does it mean for who I am? And so there's this thing called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the way, if I'm not living a life that matches up with the ideal version of myself in my head, I don't like that, right? Like, we want to believe that we're being the person that we want to be. And I see cognitive dissonance a lot in doctors that start to do other things, like whether it's move into industry, whether it's to start doing other careers, whether it's just going part-time so they can spend more time with their family, whether it is moving up into management leadership roles, which is more and more common, right? As we have corporatization, we have a lot more doctors that are getting bumped up to be a chief of staff at a hospital, a medical director, something like that. And now we've got more and more doctors that are stronger leaders that are moving up into overseeing multiple hospitals. And these are roles that just didn't exist in the past. And so there's a lot of doctors moving up into into those spots, and they're really having an identity crisis in a lot of ways, because they're like, man, I the ideal version of me is in the exam room helping people, fixing pets, helping pet owners, making an impact there. I'm the person who, when my technicians say we're really behind, I can step in, I can fix things. I can't get this catheter in, I can step in and do that, whatever. I say that as a total joke, because my technicians are never going to ask me to put a catheter in, because they're exponentially better than I am. But the idea is, as we're not doing those anymore, we have this weird thing of like, who am I and what am I? And if you hold yourself to the standard of, I am great because I'm excellent in the exam room and clients like me and I get thank you notes. And then you're not in the exam room anymore and you're not getting that validation and you're not getting thank you notes because you're not in the exam room like you used to be. It feels like you're like, I'm failing, right? The thing that I thought made me good, I'm no longer doing. And so I'm failing. So there's a lot of pain that I see people who are carrying around from this identity. So I kind of went through that as well. I very much had this imposter syndrome of, as I do more and more things that I do. So I own Uncharted Veterinary Conference, and I run this business conference and this sort of online community for vet leaders. It's a very much leadership development platform. And so as I do that, and I do more and more speaking and I do writing and stuff, I still practice, but not in a significant way like I used to. I mean, every week I'm in the clinic, but it's at one day, and that's it. And it's you start to look at yourself and you're like, I don't like the idea that I'm pretending that I'm a full-time veterinarian. I don't want people to see that. And I don't like to live my life in this idea that I'm misleading people about who I am. Like I want to have that confidence. I heard this interview with a Hollywood agent one time, and she said, powerful people don't wear toupees. And that's what she said. And the idea is that a toupee is something that someone wears because they're insecure about the way they look, right? Something like that. So you got a guy and he's bald and he's going to wear a toupee. And she said, the thing is that people know, and they've got something on you. Like you're trying to fool them. You're showing that you are insecure about this thing, and they're, and you're putting it forward, and people, and they know, and they feel like they've got something on you. And I don't mean this in a bad way at all, but the idea, she says, powerful people don't wear toupees. The idea is that if you're powerful, you don't care, right? Like you're not going to give someone that leverage or that ability. You are who you are, and you have that confidence. And again, I'm not trying to make this a referendum on toupees at all, but it was an interesting way of putting it. And she looked at it, and I'm kind of like, man, I feel like I'm wearing this veterinary toupee in a way of like, I'm not in practice all the time, and I feel like I'm worried about people knowing that, and that doesn't make any sense. That's not how I want to live my life, and it's not an authentic version of myself. And so I don't think anybody cares, but I care, right? Like I'm talking about my self-identity and sort of sorting these things out. So anyway, ultimately it comes all the way back around to basically I got comfortable with the idea of not being a quote unquote real vet, right? Like I was like, look, I'm a guy, I'm a writer and a speaker, and I practice. I'm a dad and I practice, right? I think we have a problem in vet medicine in a lot of ways of like just having our identity so wrapped up in our job. I think there's something really healthy in being able to say, it's just a job. Like, it's not who I am. I go to work and I do the thing and I go home and I put it down and I have other hobbies and I do other things and I engage with my family. And like, I think that there's, when we talk about burnout and mental health and stuff like that in vet medicine, I think this idea of being a veterinarian defines my core being. I don't know that that's really healthy. My sort of mental shift was to say, I'm not going to ask myself if I'm a real vet or not. I am a dad who practices. I am a writer who sees cases. Like that's what I do. That's who I am. And that's not cognitive dissonance for me, because that is who I am. And it's not the authentic version of sort of myself and how I see it. And so when I talk to leaders who have, say, moved up and they're managing people now instead of seeing appointments, a lot of them go, but am I a real vet? And I was like, well, there's two options. You can either try to talk yourself around into the idea that, yes, I am a real vet because this is what being a real vet means. And so you can go through the process of defining what is a real vet in your mind, or you can let that go and just say, I am a leader of people who also sees appointments when it's needed. And decide to be okay with that. But anyway, that was sort of the process that I sort of went through.
Well, and I mean, I'm listening to you talk and I relate so closely to everything that you're saying, like all of those emotions I can identify with. And I agree with you about having it baked into your identity, like you put it, and that it is a reality. I don't know if it's healthy, but I know it's part of me. It is what it is. Yeah, sure. I can certainly feel that way.
Well, of course, like think about the process it takes to become a vet, right? So you go through 4 years of vet school. Vet school is hard. Like it's really hard. I'll never forget one of my buddies that was in vet school. At one point, it was like 1 a.m. and we're in the library and we're like studying. And he looked at me and he said, honestly, did you think vet school was going to be this hard? And I was like, no, I 100% did not think it was going to be this hard. I was like, yeah, it's a thing. I'll go. It's like a program.
I've done school my whole life.
I've done a lot of school. I had no idea how hard vet school would be. I still blown away at like how difficult it was. But it was this crucible in a lot of ways. And when you go through something like that, it does become an identity, right? You see people who are like wild college fans, like they went to the school and now they have all the,
Florida Gators,
all the way. I know, exactly. But vet school is that turned up 9 notches, right? Like it's the same thing of like, people celebrate because they had this experience and it's sort of they incorporate this experience into their identity. But man, that's nothing compared to vet medicine when you're like, boy, the training process is so rigorous and so grueling. And then I punch in and punch out every single day. And what we do is emotionally challenging work. It is a very difficult job. It's a great job. It's a difficult job. And so all of those things are like you carry those scars, those experiences. And of course they kind of bake into how you see yourself. I think it's undeniable. It's going to happen. I think so much it may be an unreasonable goal to say, I'm going to think this is just a job and still be happy. I think it's probably one of those things in life that's good to aspire to because you're never going to do it. But by trying to get there, you're putting yourself into a healthy space. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even know that I think if you're like, I don't see it as a job, so I'm failing. I think that's wrong. I think that you should aspire to see it as a job. And then when you come up short, you're probably where you need to be.
You're probably where a lot of us are.
Yeah.
And where all of us.
Hopefully, yeah.
Well, and I like that you brought up the cognitive dissonance and there's this internal monologue that we're all trying to figure out. But listening to you talk about it and thinking about it from my own perspective, I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I'm putting all of this energy into how I describe what I do to other people. Like that is where the rub is. And I'm like, is it in the grand scheme of things? Like, is it really that important how I describe my job to other people who ask me?
It's interesting. For most people, the answer is a solid no. There are other vets that will 100% look at you like, oh, but do you practice? And like you see it. Like I always remember people over the years always ask me and like, but how much do you practice? And it's interesting because in their mind, like that's the value system that they have, which is you're a vet, which is defined at how many hours a week you're in practice seeing patients and putting your hands on them. And like that's how they associate what you're doing. I think that when you're being asked that question, it feels like a judgment question of like, what is your worth? I don't think that people mean it that way. I think they genuinely want to understand, what do you do with your time? And so I think that the way that you receive that question is probably different from how it's intended. Although there are some people who definitely have that measuring stick out. And what I would say is, it's a stupid measuring stick.
There you go. Is that really a healthy
exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. It's like, but how many hours do you spend in the exam room? And I'm like, what does that have to do with anything, really? Right. You know what I mean? Like, if you want to understand,
medicine, like it's so far and wide. There's so much more to it.
Yeah. Well, if you want to understand how I spend my time, then yeah, I totally get it. If it's the idea is we're going to compare ourselves as individuals to each other based on the number of hours we spend in the exam room, that's not a contest that I'm particularly interested in. But I do think that part of the growth is deciding that you're not interested in that contest. If you think that contest is important, then it's going to, then the measuring is a big deal for you and always will be a big deal from you. But I think what's liberating is to say, this is not a contest I want to win. It's kind of like if you step back and you look at, I think most of us go through this in life, right? We came to vet medicine and we did not come here for riches, right? And so at some point in this world, and we've got this very visual society and people are on social media and we see how other people live their lives and we're seeing the best versions of themselves in the front stage and their vacations and stuff. At some point you have to kind of decide, well, what does it mean to have a happy life? And so I think most of us at some point figured out like, I'm not going to measure the quality of my life by the money that I make or by the material possessions that I have. And I think this is another extension of that is like we're always deciding how we're going to measure the quality of our life. And so there's just a lot of us who measure the quality of our life by the number of hours we spend in the exam room helping pets. And it's not a bad measurement, but I wouldn't compare people with that measurement. And I choose not to value myself based on that measurement.
I feel like you're speaking to my soul here because spoiler alert, I did increase my time in industry and it was hard and I struggled a lot emotionally, probably because of that measuring stick we're talking about. But at some point I looked around and I was like, I'm really happy with the situation that I have here. And I'm the same as you. I still practice. I still practice a lot. It did kind of become this, I became comfortable talking to people about what I do and saying, I'm in continuing education. And I think you actually helped me craft some of that wording of like, this is what you do. This is what you're doing. And it helped put a label on it, helped me recognize the importance of it. And then I woke up one day and exactly like you're describing, like that measuring stick didn't matter anymore.
Yeah, that's what it's got to be.
Good.
I'm in continuing education and I practice veterinary medicine. That's great. Like that's an accurate representation of who you are. And also when you use that language, it's you verbalizing the measuring stick that has chosen to matter to you, right? Everybody should have a measuring stick, right?
I was going to say, should we have these measuring sticks? Are these important?
You should, but you should be extremely intentional about which measuring stick you choose, right? Because your life is what you focus on. And so if you focus on the fact that I'm not in the clinic as much as I want to be or as much as I used to be, then your life is one of you coming up short. And that's how your life is. And if you focus on politics and you're like, I eat, breathe, and sleep politics, then your life is politics and conflict. And your life is this thing that's going on that you really have very little or no influence in. Right. And that's your life, is this thing that you don't have any influence over. And so again, I'm not saying, ignore this or do that, but I am saying you should be intentional about what you focus on. And so, if you say, it's a subtle shift, but if you say, I'm going to measure myself based on the number of appointments that I see, and I switch that over to, I'm going to measure my life based on the impact I have in my community, those are different measuring sticks.
Very.
But I don't think that one is necessarily better than the other. But I think that you can select a measuring stick that matches what you're doing and who you are. And I think you can be much more happy. But ultimately, you have to decide what's important so you can live your life to it. But you should be really intentional about how you make that selection.
I like your focus on intentionality there. Like, I think that is something that's really difficult because it is so easy to define yourself as a veterinarian by exam time. And then when you get away from that, all of a sudden, you're kind of like a ship without a rudder of where am I, who am I, what am I doing? So not just letting it all come together and figure it out along the way, but seeing it clearly. And I like what you said about being intentional about how you craft that messaging to yourself, even more importantly than other people.
Oh, absolutely. So veterinary medicine it's intoxicating that way in that there are so many things that we can quantify in medicine. And I think most of us look around and try to figure out, is our life meaningful? Are we living the purpose that we want? And we always want to know how we're doing. And honestly, I don't know how much of it is trained into us or bred into us versus how much is trained into it. I promise you, it is definitely trained into us, right? So we go through vet school and everybody's trying to get an A and everything is quantified. And what did you get in this exam? And what did you get in this course? And do you get a gold star? Do you get a pat on the back? And we're brought up into that system. And so then you get out and I see a lot of vets really struggle with the end of the pat on the head, A+ system. And so they look for another way to pat themselves on the head or get the A+ or get the gold star. And vet medicine offers a lot of things that are very quantifiable. How many appointments did you see today? How many patients did you see? How many thank you notes did you get? Did people mention you in online reviews? So, what's your Google rating? What's your practice's Google rating? Are you doing this other thing? Are you certified in this thing or that thing? There's all of these little gold stars and metrics and numbers that you can put on and say, how am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing? The thing that's hard to put a number on is how you're going to feel at the end of your days. You know what I mean? When you look back on your life and say, did I live a good life? I think a lot of us would really like to be able to get a report card that tells us how we did, because a lot of us came up in that system and we're like, I've always gotten A's. Right. I'm going to get an A in life.
How else will I know?
How else will I know? But there is no report card that comes at the end. You know what I mean? You don't get a grade on the quality relationship you have with your kids. You know what I mean? You don't get a grade based on who you affected and how you helped other people in their lives. It's not quantifiable. And I think that's a challenge. I think it's really easy to try to look at the numbers and say, how am I doing? How am I doing? And so it's not an easy issue. But
kind of an internal.
It's absolutely an internal thing.
Evaluation there. And that's because things are so externally quantifiable and there's so much data to say how we're doing, at least professionally. Maybe it makes it harder to look internally and find that internal validation.
Oh, of course it is. I really struggle with this. Again, it's you write the book you need to read. I really struggle with validating myself. It was funny. I was I was talking to somebody recently, and I'm a big believer in positive reinforcement. Like I really am. And so like my staff that I work with, I really want them to know how much I appreciate them. I really focus a lot more on trying to catching people doing good work and calling it out, as opposed to saying, oh, this didn't really go well, or we could do that better. I'd much rather catch them when they crush it and just say, did you see that? Did you see how that worked? See how great that was? Let's do that again, because that was amazing. Like it's a better way to grow people and to make them want to work for you. But the truth is, I don't tend to use that with myself very much. I'm very problem focused. And so I'm that guy who, like, I could do a surgery and it would be great. And I will say that incision could have been smaller. Mm-hmm. That's exactly it.
Yes, Did I put that suture in the right spot? Did I put an extra one in that I shouldn't?
It's pooching out at the bottom.
Yes. Yeah. The dog ears.
Exactly. And like, I don't, it's a thing we all kind of have to work on, right? I think a lot of things that make you great in your profession as a veterinarian or as anything else, most all the things that make you great are also double-edged swords. Like your attention to detail is going to torture you in that you can't control everything and it'll always be wrong. Your perfectionism is going to make you wonderful in working up cases, and it's going to punish you because you're going to really struggle to delegate because other people won't do it the way that you do. Your charisma is great because it makes people want to be around you, and it also makes it really hard to get out of exam rooms. Yeah, and slows you down. But it's almost all that way. It's really interesting. And so I didn't realize earlier in my life how much our real strengths are almost always weaknesses on the other side. And we really have to manage our strengths, or else they'll eat us up.
Yeah, I never really thought about it. You always think about it from the contrary perspective of like, my greatest weakness actually is my greatest strength and all this. But you're right. Like it goes the other way. My strength is my weakness as well. I remember right before my vet school interview, having a conversation with a friend of mine who was helping me prep for the interview. And I was working as a technician at the time. And I said, I'm pulling my hair out, and I can't keep up with all of these things. And he said, well, don't you have other people that you work with? And I said, well, yeah, but the manager pulled me aside and she said, ultimately what happens on the floor is my responsibility at the end of the night. And so I have to go and I have to make sure everything is right, because otherwise it's going to come back on me. And he said, well, don't you trust the people you work with? Yeah. And I said, yeah, of course I do. He's like, well, then why are you having to go back and check and double check? And so what you said there about being a really bad delegator, I feel like is something that I can identify with very closely. I certainly feel that the perfectionist and detail oriented tendencies in myself, just because I think we're all a little bit that way. I don't think my husband would agree. I think
well, but it's on the flip side as well. So one of my strengths is delegation. Like I tend to leverage people really. That's why I'm such a big technician fan. It's because I like techs and I like working with techs, and they make me so much faster and better because I'm very comfortable delegating to them. But there's a flip side to that sword as well, which is I will empower people, and sometimes they'll struggle because I empower them, but they don't have as much support as they would like, and I have to manage that. I'm very willing to give you this thing. I'm giving you an opportunity here. But sometimes I delegate these things away, and there's a chance I'm going to have to go back and say, this didn't work out the way that we wanted, or, hey, I didn't realize that you hadn't been trained in this, and things like that. But there's no perfect way. You're going to fail on one side or the other. You're either not going to give people opportunities, you're not going to give them autonomy, or you're giving them autonomy and they're going to make mistakes. Sure. And so you pick your poison. And like that's another part of life is we're always just picking our poison, right? The Buddhists say that life is suffering, and like that seems really awful and morbid. But I think it's true in a lot of ways. I think that life is always going to be hard, and you should just know it's always going to be hard. And the greatest empowerment we have is choosing how you're going to struggle, because you're going to struggle. And so do you want to struggle by holding on to everything so it gets done the right way? Or do you want to struggle by giving it away to people, and then you have to check back up on them, and every now and then we have to make some adjustments? There's no way that doesn't have some hardship in it. It's choosing the hardship that you have.
I've heard the Buddha saying life is suffering. I think that's good life advice to say, like you said, life is going to be hard no matter what. Yeah. How would you apply that to vet med? Like, I mean, in some ways, vet med is hard. Like, and it's always going to be hard. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? So people talk a lot about the hardships of the profession. I think this is I'm really glad you asked me this, because I think this is really important. Vet medicine is always going to be hard. Mm-hmm. It is a hard job. It is an emotionally taxing job. It is a mentally taxing job. It is a hard job. You get to choose how you suffer in this life and how you struggle. And so here is the question. Do you want to struggle having a hard job that people get really upset about? Like there's people who have strong emotional feelings about their pets and how their pets are treated. You're going to deal with people who are having the worst days of their life. Mm-hmm. You're going to deal with high stakes situations. You're going to deal with death, but you're going to do work that matters. Do you want to struggle and suffer that way? Or do you want to have a job that nobody cares whether or not you actually make the widget? No one's ever going to know whether or not you showed up for your shift in, whatever big warehouse. That's suffering as well, because you're doing work that doesn't matter, or you're doing work that nobody cares about, or they don't care very much about. And there's not a right answer, and there's not a wrong answer. And I'm not trying to crap on anybody's job, but at some point we chose a hard job, and the alternative is to choose a not hard job, or a not important job, or a job that does not affect other people in the deep way that we affect pet owners. And that's your choice.
Yeah. For me, I think it depends on the day, which way I want to suffer. There's for the resounding majority of the time, I love doing the work that matters, but I definitely have my days that I wake up and I would rather go make widgets.
Sure. Of course. And I think that's also, I think there's truth to that as well of like, you don't have, life comes in waves, right? In phases. I'm not a big believer in the phrase of work-life balance. I don't like that. It means to me, when people say work-life balance, I imagine that I'm supposed to sleep for 8 hours, I'm supposed to work for 8 hours, and I'm supposed to be detached with my family for 8 hours, right?
Sure.
That's too many hours. That's right. Anyway, all right, cool. But that's how it's broken up, right? And you do this, and my life has never worked that way. Everything has bled over into other things. And I just think that's kind of how, I think that's how it is.
I think I hear you talk about work-life integration.
Yes. It is very much starting to think about what kind of life do you want to have, and how does it make it, and how does it work? My big thing when I look at work-life integration is, your life is complicated, and there's no balance. It doesn't work that way. But the way that it looks like for me is there's tides, right? Like think of like ocean tides. You have high tides and low tides, and they come in phases. And that's just been how my life has always worked. I can't comment on other people's lives, but mine is for sure. Sometimes there are high tides, and what that means is we're working all the time. And sometimes it's low tides, and we get to relax. Remember when you went to vet school and you got your butt kicked in the first year? That's high tide. And remember your first year, if you did an internship, or your first year as a new vet, that's high tide. Mm-hmm. And when you're 3 or 4 years in, perhaps you're gonna organize your life and say, hey, I'm comfortable now. I've got a number of years of experience. I'm going to take kind of this year and just sort of practice and not push myself to new things. Or maybe you say, hey, I've been out 5 years and I'm going to buy this vet practice, and it's going to be that's a high tide. And we don't always get to choose when our high tides and low tides are, but I think that's really important. You should always pay attention to that. And so, yes, you're not going to feel every day like this is how I want to suffer. This is what I want to do. I'm going to keep the pedal to the metal. I don't think that's sustainable either. But I think there's times in our lives, and I'm not talking about 3 hours. I'm not talking about 3 weeks. I'm talking about a year where you're going to lean in and you're going to work, and this is going to be kind of a burden that you're going to carry. And then hopefully you're going to set your life up so that you have some time to kind of lean back a little bit, and maybe have a low tide when things kind of roll along in a more organized, less stressful sort of way. But anyway, that's just kind of how it's been for me. Is things go well, and 6 months I'm kind of laid back, and then a year I work really hard, and then kind of another year you say, well, this is I've figured some things out. I've got a good job. I'm comfortable here. I'm just going to kind of do this and live my life, and then something else will come along, and the tide will rise again. I can handle stressful times, and I'm okay with feeling, God, I'm working all the time, as long as I believe like there's a path ahead. I'm going somewhere.
Right. There's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you're working and you're like, I'm working all the time and there's no way out for me, and I do not see this changing, I think it's a really dark place to be. If you're saying, I'm working really hard right now because I'm onboarding new assistants and front desk staff, right? And so you go, God, I'm working so hard, but you're going to get them onboarded and you're going to get them trained, and then you're going to be able to step back and breathe a little bit. That's a much happier, friendlier place than I'm working really hard and this is my life forever. And I think that when people find themselves mentally in that second place, that's a dark place that a lot of people are.
It's where we start to go to burnout.
Exactly, it's where we start to get a burnout. And so anyway, there's some things that we can make if you're in the adjustments we can make if you get into that place. But I think when we talk about people working hard, burnout's not about working hard. Burnout is about looking ahead at the future and what you see. There's this book called Lone Survivor, right? So it's an army book. Mark Wahlberg was in a movie called Lone Survivor. Anyway, in the book it's interesting because this guy's true story of his life, and he's a Navy SEAL, and he talks about the Navy SEAL training, right? And so they go through this really intense, crazy training, and it's like 10 weeks long. And basically the last week they call it Hell Week, and it's just awful. Like you don't sleep for a week, and it's just complete brutality. Okay, so he tells his story, and what happens is they go through 9 weeks of just grueling training. And they get to the 10th week, which is hell week. And they have this bell. And if you ring the bell, it means you quit and you drop out of the training. And so they're always trying to get people to ring the bell because they want them to drop out. So only the best of the best of the best get through this thing. Anyway, the guy tells a story about how on the first day of hell week, more people rang that bell than had rang it in the previous 9 weeks. Okay. And so later on, he was talking to one of the instructors and he said, that was really weird because here we were, and it was the first day of hell week, and we have had harder days, absolutely had harder days than the first day of hell week. But all these guys dropped out on the first day of hell week. Why is that? And the instructor said, because it's not the day that broke them. It's the knowledge that there's 6 more days ahead. That's what broke them. And that's the same thing in vet medicine, where there's not a hard day that's going to break you. But if you believe that there's nothing but hard days ahead, that's what drags you down and holds you there. And so it's really not about that, what I did today. It's about the idea that there's not a light at the end of the tunnel that I'm going towards. If you're looking at your life and you're looking at your career, I need you to believe that things are going to get better. I need you to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Even if you have to make that light, even if it's, I'm going to do this for 3 months. And if they're not able to hire more people to help me, I am going to go and tell them, hey, I am changing my work schedule because I can't keep this up. Or in 3 months, if they don't have some help, I'm going to leave. And you go, oh, that's awful. And I go, it's not awful. It's me being honest about what I'm capable of and what's possible. Remember, like at some point, I think the biggest lesson that veterinarians need to learn right now is you need to look in the mirror and you need to start to think about capacity. And your capacity is your ability to actually do work. How much can you handle? And your desire to help people cannot outshine your capacity. It can't, not in a ongoing way. There are some days that I give more than I have. I suck it up and I grit my teeth and I do it. I can't do that for a year. Right. I can do it for a day. I can do it for maybe for a week, maybe 3 weeks. I can't, I can't live my life this way. And so that's just how it is. And so at some point you have to believe that you can't pour from an empty cup, right? You can't feed from an empty pantry. If you don't have it to give, you can't give it. And so the question then is, what is your goal, right? What is your measuring stick? And what happens is a lot of people get the wrong measuring stick in their mind. They say, how much good can I do today? Right. And that's the measuring stick they have. And that's a wrong measuring stick. The right measuring stick is, how much good can I do in my career? Right. And that's really important, because if you give of yourself and you give of yourself and you give of yourself and you burn out and you lead the profession 4 years, the amount of good you did is tiny compared to had you had set some boundaries and you worked for 30 years because you didn't burn out. The overall amount of good that you do is significantly greater by you saying no, setting some boundaries, deciding this is what I'm able to do. I'm sorry, this is all I have to give, and keeping that in a sustainable way. And too many of us, we help ourselves out of the profession, and that's a problem.
I feel like you're just like in my head right now. For some reason, I feel like every time we talk, you say exactly what I need to hear. And this is no exception, because I've been in both of those spots. I've been in a clinical capacity where I'm like, this is never going to get any better. But then, take it on the flip side. I've talked about my mobile practice on the podcast before, and I've been working really hard on it lately, really hard. And it has to do with clients, but a lot of it has to do with paperwork and automations and all these different things. And it's been a lot. And to the point where I'm like, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, but there is that light at the end of the tunnel. There is that, to finish it. And it's a totally different feeling dealing with that than it is that clinical, this is never going to get any better. And I say clinical because that's what the experience was for me. And talking about that work-life integration, it made me think about my kids. And one of the things I like to talk about is walking that line as a parent of, I want to be the mom for my kids that's there for what they need, that, I want to show up to their games and their concerts and whatever they have going on and make sure that they can live, this full, happy childhood. But at the same time, I also want to be this good example of, I'm speaking from a woman's perspective of this person who goes and I have goals and I have aspirations and I work hard and I attain them. And man, it is such a balancing act. And your high tide and low tide example I was like, that sounds, I identify with that.
Well, I mean, high tide is dance season when your kid is on 3 dance teams and they do this thing, but it's a season. Right. Some people are like, that's my whole life. And I go, we need to talk about capacity. Yes. But if you're like, this is what we do. And we've got Monday, Wednesday, and Friday dance, and it's for 3 months out of the year or whatever. And you decide this is important. Well, it's high tide, and we're gonna buckle down. We're gonna pull together as a family. We're gonna talk about logistics, how we get this thing done. We're gonna do some time management, and we're gonna do it with the idea that we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna step back, and you can do something else, but it's gonna be one night a week.
There you go. Yeah.
After that. But that's exactly what I'm talking about as far as high tides and low tides is, it may not be possible to say 2 nights a week per kid, per activity, in perpetuity. That's what happens. Mm-hmm. No, sometimes it's 5 nights a week for a couple of months, and then we go down to 1 night a week. But my big thing is you need to intentionally go back down to 1 night a week and say, this is low tide intentionally. And then, in 3 months, 6 months, or whatever, we're going to step back up and this new thing is going to start and we're going to pick it back up from there.
And also kind of like taking turns, like, okay, we're going to, it's dance season. So we're going to do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then we're going to have competitions on the weekend and we're going to travel and then end that. And okay, I've put some of the work aside because I've really tried to focus on this and be present for this. Well, now I need to focus here a little bit more and I need to spend some time on myself, on my business, whatever it is. Yeah.
And there are 2 pieces of that. One is I think that we're relaxing in some rigidity of how we think things are supposed to be and buying into the integration part, I think is key. So you're working on your mobile practice and everything. Cassie, there's nothing wrong with working your butt off and then stopping at 3 p.m. and receiving your kids from school and doing the stuff you want to do with them and hanging out and helping with homework and and having some relaxing time and whatever. And then picking your laptop back up at 9 o'clock at night and banging out.
You are describing so much.
Exactly. And banging out another 90 minutes of work before you go to bed. Like, that's not wrong. And like, if that's works, because the kids go to bed at 8:30 and I'm going to work from 8:30 to 10 and like, not every night, but 3 nights, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, this is my plan. Or just tonight, I got stuff I need to do. I'm going to pick this back up. It's not failing. I think a lot of us, we set in our minds, I'm going to work from 8 to 5, and then I'm going to be a mom or a dad from 5 to 9, and then I'm going to relax in the bathtub from 9 to 10, and then that's going to be my day. And when that doesn't happen because, hey, I need to be a mom from noon today on, or I need to be a dad from noon today because it's a half day at school for some unknown reason, like I got dumped on it, or I'm gonna clock out and go to this 11 a.m. dance recital on Wednesday, at the school's putting on. I'm going to do it because it's what's expected to me, but I'm not going to beat myself up about it. And I think a lot of us, we do the thing it takes to be a good parent and we feel guilty about it the whole time.
I feel like we have to justify it.
100%.
Well, I went to the thing, but I went back to my laptop. Like, nobody cares.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
Did you get the work done?
Yeah, did you get the work done? So I run a company. We do business conferences, business development, things like that. We have unlimited vacation and I don't care when you work. And so that's how the business is set up. The way that we run it that way is, I'm very problem focused, being like, hey, Cassie, I need you to fix this problem. And that's it. And that's it. And then
don't care how you fix it.
I don't care. I don't care if you do it at 4 a.m, as long as you don't call me. But I don't care if you do it at 4 a.m, as long as you do it. But if that works in your life, I think that's great. I think there's a lot of rigidity around our schedules that have been kind of imposed over time. And again, I know that that's not feasible. Like, you can have a vet clinic that's just kind of open whenever we feel like being there. However, I still think there's a lot of things in our lives where we can say, am I supposed to be unplugged from my work from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m, yes or no? Or am I supposed to be engaged with my kids and making sure that I'm giving them quality time and my attention? The latter is much more flexible. There's so many more ways to do this. But if I'm supposed to be off work from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m, there's only one way to do that. And it's wildly, rigidly inflexible. That seems like I don't understand why the goal is to be unavailable from 3 to 6 p.m. What is that? It's a made up construct, right? Of like, we put this on ourselves and we act like we're failing if we're not available. I just think that's a dumb idea. Like, no one's like, oh, Mom, I really wish you'd been available from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Like, no one, they're like, oh, Mom, I wish you'd.
I really appreciate that 7 to 8, but man, the 3 to 6 is what I needed.
Like, yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. But your kid's never going to look you in the eye and go, you know what really mattered to me? That 4:30 meeting that you canceled. Like, it's what matters is the relationship that we have. And it's funny. I've been through periods in my life where I beat myself up because I was working too hard. And then I cut back and I beat myself up because I wasn't working hard enough. You know what I mean?
Right. Yes,
and like at some point I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, I'm beating myself up for being with my family, and I'm beating myself up for not being with my family, and I'm beating myself up for working, and beating myself up for not working. I'm like, Andy, how is this sustainable? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you're saying. And I hope this talk helps a lot of people out there, because yes, like, that is 100% me. And it's so comforting to know that I'm not the only one that's doing that.
No, I don't think you are. We're all hard driving, people. I think a lot of it is stepping back. And for me, that whole thing of like, we choose how we suffer. I think a lot of it is stepping back and saying, what is possible? what is important? What am I trying to accomplish here? And I think most of us never stopped and said, what am I trying to accomplish? I mean, honestly, think about how many veterinarians went to vet school and they learned the thing and they were like, hey, professors, what am I supposed to do? And the professor's like, you should do an internship. And they're like, all right, I'm going to do an internship. And you're like, hey, internship, what am I supposed to do? And they're like, you should get a job. And you're like, I'm getting a job. Hey, boss, what am I supposed to do? You're supposed to see 20 appointments a day forever. And you're like, I'm doing it. And like, at any point, did you stop and say, what do I want to get out of this deal?
Yeah. I think there's a term, micro flexibilities, that basically saying, we have 2 income households and there's a lot of things going on and things are really busy. So like you said, to not hold to these very rigid schedules, to say, I'm going to take an hour here, I'm going to take an hour there and focus on that and not beat yourself up for it, not feel like you have to justify it to yourself or other people. That's where I really struggle.
Well, I think the biggest thing for me in making that happen was intentionality. I think a lot of us are very comfortable with the idea of intentionality and planning in our job, but we don't think that intentionality and planning in our personal life is a thing that we do. And I'll give you the simplest of examples. Like, life-changing thing for me is my Sunday meeting with my wife. And on Sundays, we're pretty darn religious about it at this point. On Sundays, we look at the calendar for the coming week and say, what are we doing for meals? What are you doing in the evening? Where am I doing? Where do the kids need to be? Let's all get on the same page. And what I have found is you choose how you suffer. I can make time and have this meeting on Sunday and get my calendar out and sit with my wife in a way that feels kind of weird, because I'm like, oh, let's check your availability. All right.
It's so true that we do the same thing, but we don't do it religiously on Sunday. So I hope my husband doesn't listen to this, because he will be like, that is a brilliant idea.
I tell you, so you choose how you suffer. So you can either do the awkward meeting on Sundays and make time for it, or you can have fights on Thursday because they're like, I thought you were going to take her to gymnastics. And you're like, you can have these sacrifices you can't see. They're not on your calendar. Like, fight with my wife is not on my calendar at any point. I promise.
And it's not
schedule that.
Not a, kind of like we've talked about other things not being sustainable in the long term. Like, nobody wants to fight with their spouse on a regular basis.
Right. Exactly. And when I say fight, we're being overly dramatic,
sure.
but it's not necessarily a fight, but you feel your cortisol spike.
Yeah.
And you feel the stress and you're like, I'm not around tonight to do this thing that you're asking me to do. And they're frustrated because their plan is not going, and it feels like a fight, even though you're both rooting for each other and you're both being understandable.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to let the other person down.
Exactly right. You don't want to let the other person down. Anyway, everybody understands that emotional feeling.
Sure.
So anyway, but it really comes back down to you pick your battles. One of my favorite sayings is, and I talk about a lot of things I talk about in the clinic just apply to regular life. But in the clinic, one of my favorite sayings is, if there's something that happens in your clinic again and again and again that surprises you, at some point it's not a surprise. It's your business model. If you end up with clients standing around at the end of the day and you're trying to close the door and they're like, no, I walked in here, I'm staying here. If that happens one time, you deal with it. And if it happens once a month, you deal with it. If it happens 3 times a week, it's your business model is having people standing in your lobby at the end of the day. And you can either just accept that that's what your business model is and be okay with it and make sure your staff is okay with it, or you can make changes to address it, but acting like, I can't believe people are standing in the lobby again. Like, at some point you go, why can you not believe that? It happens all the time. Same thing is true in our personal lives. Like, at some point, if I look around on Wednesdays and I'm like, what do you mean I'm supposed to take her? You're supposed to take her. If I'm arguing with my wife every Wednesday about kid transport, at some point, I'm the doofus who hasn't figured out yet that Wednesday kid transport is a problem and we need to sort it out intentionally and figure out how we're going to get this done.
I feel like we've come full circle here with the intentionality. I feel like a lot of it does come down to intentionality in our self-talk and how we think about ourselves and how we talk to ourselves, how we express that to people, because whether or not it should be important, I think we've determined that it is. And just that it can offer a lot of peace when you sit down and have that self-reflection or that Sunday meeting or whatever it is, to really know where you stand and you're not just kind of flailing.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's really important. And it's, it's validating yourself and it's validating your spouse. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's saying, hey, I see you working hard. And it's funny if you take a second and think, what's really important in your life? Is it your, net promoter score as a veterinarian, or is it how your spouse feels about you? And you might say, well, it's how my spouse feels about me. And I go, okay, well, your spouse probably feels the same way. When's the last time you told your spouse that they're crushing it? When was the last time you told your spouse, hey, I just want you to know, there's no measuring stick for this, but I want you to know that you're succeeding, you're winning. We don't get a lot of that. And I think that that's a problem.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I know. I can think about that. My husband's great about having those little kudos moments and stuff. And it really changes my whole day.
Yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's like in vet medicine a lot, right? There is no scenario where everything in the clinic runs smoothly. There's chaos baked into the bread in vet medicine. Like, there's too many things out of your control, right? There's emergencies, there's people walking in, pets get sick. They can't control pet owners. You know what I mean? Like, I think we can kid ourselves that I'll get this figured out and there'll be a system and people will show up on time for their appointments and blah, blah. Like,
wait, that doesn't happen?
Never going to happen.
That's the lie I tell myself.
Yeah. We tell ourselves a lie. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. We need to just go along with the idea that there is chaos and there's going to be some chaos, but I can still be intentional. I can still try to set myself up for success. I can still adapt based on what happens. But I don't know. I think that chaos can be fun and it can be rewarding, and it's part of what we are. If you feel like you're failing because there's chaos, I think that you're failing because vet medicine is vet medicine. Like, that's just what it is.
Yes. No, I very much relate to that statement. Control the things that you can control, and that allows you to lean into the chaos a little bit and have fun with it. Like, my day got totally derailed this past Tuesday, where I had a full schedule and then I had multiple emergencies walk in, literally dying, and it just was what it was. But because a lot of the rest of it was controlled and we knew what to expect, we dealt with it, and we did a lot of good for.
Well, I have a sort of a niche analogy for this, and I'll give it, and this may be where we'll wrap up. But I don't know if other people appreciate this, but I'll tell you this. Veterinary, if you think about your team at the vet clinic, right? Your vet team, it's the Muppet Show, right? It's the Muppet Show. And so when you think about the Muppet Show, there's two kinds of Muppets. There's order Muppets and there's chaos Muppets. Okay. And the chaos Muppets are the ones who are they're riding bulls through they're trying to change the show on the last minute. It's Gonzo shooting himself out of a cannon without any practice, no targeting, just complete chaos. And then there's the order Muppets, which are like Scooter, that have the clipboard. They're like, no, this has to go, and these people have to go. And the whole Muppet Show is a battle between the chaos Muppets and the order Muppets, and they battle for control. And every single episode of the Muppet Show is chaos versus order. And Kermit the Frog is the linchpin, right? He's in the middle, and his job is to balance the order Muppets and the chaos Muppets. And he's always just about overwhelmed, and then he pulls it out. And so if the Muppet Show was a basketball game, every single show the score would be chaos 98, frog 99. Like, that's how the Muppet Show works. That's your vet clinic. It's every day is this chaos, and you've got the chaos Muppets and you've got the order Muppets, and you need them both. You can't just have the order Muppets. And the chaos Muppets, they exist, they're real, and they may be pet owners that come in from the outside, but they are going to bring that chaos there.
That's what I'm going to start calling
so
pet
people,
owners.
They are chaos Muppets, and there's people like me who are completely chaos Muppets. Like, I am 100% in that regard. But it's funny, we do this thing, and I hear all the time in business people talk about, I want my practice to be Disney. Right. And you think about the Disney princesses, right? And everybody shows up where they're supposed to, and they're all put together, and they're beautiful, and this is how it goes, and this is the time, and the prince shows up as they're supposed to. That is not how this works. It's not Disney, it's the Muppet Show. And so if you own that and go, it's the Muppet Show, it makes everything feel okay, because the expectation is not this is Disney in a well-oiled machine and everyone is on their spots and and they're all hitting their cues. It's like, nope, this is chaos. We're going to pull it out. Chaos 98. Frog 99.
I love that. It just makes it so much more fun. And I've been guilty of feeling like I'm failing when the chaos Muppets take over going, wait, why don't we have systems for this? Why didn't I foresee this? So it's good to know that's just reality, and that's okay.
Well, you should keep making systems like you should keep making systems. You should keep the chaos Muppets or the order Muppets have to keep working, right? And the chaos Muppets will just manifest. They will, exactly right. They will manifest as different chaos. The difference in a thriving business, and I think a thriving life, and a struggling business or a struggling life is, in a thriving business, you tackle a new problem every day. And in a struggling business, you have the same problem every day. And that is the difference in a thriving life and a thriving business, and a struggling life and a struggling business. If you're dealing with the same problems again and again, you're in trouble. And if you're dealing with new problems, you're living a healthy life, because there is no scenario where you don't get problems. And so, and this goes back to the quagmire we were talking about before. Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? The truth is, if you're solving new problems, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. If you're back in the same problem every day, that's the struggle bus, right? Because you're doing the same problem over and over again, right? And so anyway, The answer is not a life without problems. The answer is a life with new problems every day.
So do you have like 4 more hours? Because I could sit here and continue to pick your brain for double that, but I promise I would cut it off at 4 hours.
No, I've got a massive conference to explore here.
It is massive, goodness. And we've been having all kinds of fun with people coming and taking pictures and making faces in the fishbowl.
At any point I lost my train of thought, it was because someone was making faces at me through the glass from outside. That's happened a couple of times.
I think we did a pretty good job of like maintaining our focus despite the chaos Muppets. Well, Andy, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming and sitting down with me in the booth. And yeah, I hope we get to do it again because I mean, we don't even have to turn the microphones on. Like every time you talk, it seems to be exactly what I need to hear. So I'm not alone in that. So I think this will be what a lot of people need to hear.
Well, thanks for saying that. And that's it, guys. That's what I got for you. Thanks again to the team at Vetfolio Voice for letting me share this with you. Like I said, I hope you'll check out their podcast. They are great people doing great work. And man, it's just what a wonderful experience it was to work with them. Anyway, guys, take care of yourselves. Be well. I'll talk to you soon.